The Maternal Thread by C.J. Van Pletsen. The Eyes of the Child. Whispers in the Soil. Ambro Uri'el Smit did not speak until the age of 4. His silence unsettled the household maids crossed themselves. Farmhands muttered that perhaps the child carried Zuriel's ghost. And even Frederik, who had inherited his father's iron composure, found himself awake at night, wondering whether God had withheld words as punishment or gift. But when he finally spoke, his first sentence was not a question. It was an observation. "The vines are too dry." Frederik froze. The boy stood barefoot in the soil beside the southern vineyard, one hand clutching a carved wooden toy from Tiro's son, the other pointing at the oldest row of Chenin Blanc. "You can tell that?" Frederik asked, lowering himself to meet the boy's gaze. Ambro nodded, as if it were obvious. "The roots are tired." It was the first of many moments that unsettled even the most hardened men at Estes. Ambro didn't tantrum, didn't cry, didn't dream like other children. He observed, and when he spoke, he said things far beyond his years. By 6, he had memorized most of his grandfather's wine logs from the 1930s logs locked in a cabinet Ambro had picked open with a flattened spoon. By 7, he had discovered a hidden drawer in Zuriel's desk containing letters written in a ciphered German dialect. He didn't show anyone. He simply began learning German in secret. Evea worried, but Frederik reassured her. "He's Zuriel's echo," he said, "but also his test." "What do you mean?" "Father built this family like an empire, but every empire needs someone who can survive its fall." Uriel's education. Ambro's education was unlike that of any child born in the Cape, perhaps unlike that of any child born in the century. It was stitched together from fragments of empires and the remains of men who had once stood at the edges of history and gazed beyond. Frederik spared no effort, for he believed the boy carried a burden heavier than vineyards, ledgers, or the fragile dignity of their name. Tutors were summoned not from Stellenbosch or Cape Town, but from Europe gray-eyed linguists who smelled of old archives, military historians who had lectured in the halls of Vienna, mathematicians who had once cracked wartime ciphers in London. They arrived by ship or by the new silver planes that tore across the sky, their leather cases filled with books and maps, their pockets lined with strange currencies. Each came for a season, taught the boy with all the rigor of their disciplines, and left again, whispering to Frederik that Ambro's mind was older than his years. Swordsmanship was given to him by an aging Italian fencing master whose hands trembled when holding a teacup, but grew steady once a blade touched his palm. In the converted cellar beneath the old farmhouse, the master drilled him endlessly. Advance, retreat, lunge, recover. The steel rang against steel like bells tolling some secret liturgy. The boy learned balance, learned silence in motion, learned that every thrust carried not merely the weight of his body, but the memory of centuries of men who had fought and fallen before him. From a retired MI6 cryptologist, he inherited the art of codes. The old spy smelled faintly of pipe smoke and ink. He showed Ambro how to hide meaning inside numbers, how to twist a message until it looked like nonsense, how to read silence itself as information. Together they bent over parchment until late hours, candles dripping wax like tears. The boy's small hand copied alphabets within alphabets, ciphers nested like Russian dolls. When at last he cracked one of the master's more difficult riddles, the old man merely nodded and said, "You do not break codes. You listen until they confess." At night, under a sky vast as cathedral domes, Ambro took Amar's notebooks and traced the constellations. These were not the tidy star patterns of Western astronomy. Amar's hand had inked strange geometries, Lines between stars no atlas dared name, maps of memory, of covenant, of forgotten roads in heaven. Lying in the vineyard grass, Ambro whispered their names as though invoking prayers. Some sounded like the tongues of Babylon, others like the cries of desert prophets. He did not know what they meant, only that they felt older than his bones. Yet for all this, Ambro remained solitary. The world pressed close around him, yet he carried distance inside. He moved among tutors as if among shadows, learned eagerly yet never surrendered laughter easily. The estate children found him curious, even unsettling. His silence was not shy, it was listening. He seemed to wait for echoes they could not hear. Only one pierced that solitude: Samuel, Tiro's grandson. Samuel had the quick smile of boys who belong wholly to the earth, not to some hidden prophecy. Together they roamed the mountains behind Estes, barefoot sometimes, reckless, daring the slopes as if the rocks themselves kept their secrets. They built signal towers from wood and stone, hoisting flags stitched from old cloth, pretending they were generals commanding invisible armies. They left coded messages inside hollow pine cones, burying them beneath cairns, laughing when they returned weeks later to find them still dry within. But even Samuel admitted, when his laughter faded, that his friend's heart was elsewhere. "Ambro's always waiting," he told his mother once. "Not for me, not for anyone here. Like he's waiting for someone to arrive. Like the game we're playing is only rehearsal." Time at Estes rippled in seasons: harvest and rain, pruning and fermenting, birth and burial. Amid it, Ambro's strangeness only deepened. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the gravity of stone. One morning, when he was 8 years old, the family gathered for breakfast in the long dining room, sunlight spilling through the high windows, the air filled with the smell of bread and orchard fruit. Frederik unfolded the newspaper while Miriam set out preserves. Ambro sat quietly, spoon in hand, staring into his porridge as though reading it. Without warning, he placed the spoon down and lifted his gaze. His eyes were not the eyes of a child in that moment, but something older, something lit by a fire unseen. His voice was calm, as if reciting a fact long known to him. "My name is Uri'el," he said. "That's what he calls me." Frederik froze. His hand, halfway to his cup, trembled. Porcelain nearly slipped against wood. The words struck him like a bell tolling across decades. "Who?" he asked, his throat dry. The boy answered with the simplicity of a prophet untroubled by disbelief. "The one in the fire, grandfather." Silence fell heavy upon the table. Outside, vines stirred in a wind that had not been there a moment before. Frederik felt the old weight return, the covenant Zuriel had spoken of. The river of bloodlines he had warned could not be dammed. He saw again his father's face, lit by the low glow of ruin, whispering vows that would not die with the grave. And across from him, his son, no, not merely his son, sat with eyes that had seen beyond the hearth, beyond the cape, into the fire itself. Uri'el. The name burned now, not as memory, but as presence. Frederik bowed his head, though he did not yet know whether in fear or reverence or both. Liora's atlas. From the hallway came a sound like breath catching on a secret, a soft gasp, almost swallowed by the stillness of morning. Frederik turned, startled, and there she was, Liora, standing in the doorway, hair tangled from sleep, bare feet pale against the wooden floor. In her arms, she held a small leather-bound atlas, pressed close to her chest as though it were both shield and treasure. The lamplight touched her face and revealed what Frederik had long suspected. She had not slept. Her eyes bore the faint redness of vigil, She had been reading by moonlight again, whispering names to herself when all others lay still. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than Uriel's, but steady, carrying its own weight. "What key?" she asked. The room seemed to narrow, all walls pressing toward that single word. Uriel turned toward her. His gaze fell first upon the atlas, then upon her eyes, and then returned to the darkened fire in the hearth, as though consulting something neither sibling nor parent could see. At last he answered simply, "To a place." No one asked further. The silence stretched, not awkward, but dense, like incense thickening in a sanctuary. Liora did not move. She only tightened her grip on the atlas, as though she already knew what place he meant. Later, when the morning had loosened its grip on the house, and the sun had climbed over the mountains, Frederik, restless, lifted the atlas where his daughter had left it upon a chair. He expected childish maps, outlines of countries, seas, perhaps schoolboy notes in the margins. But when he opened it, the air shifted. These were not maps of borders and rivers. The pages were filled with constellations' intricate star charts, inked with lines that curved not according to cartographers of Lisbon or London, but as if copied from some older memory of the sky. Between the stars, faint symbols had been inscribed, tiny, precise, the handwriting unmistakably Liora's. Some marks resembled the runes Zuriel had once drawn. Others echoed the strange sigils Amar had sketched in his notebooks of the heavens. Frederik felt a tightening in his chest. He closed the atlas quickly, as if to hide it even from himself. Yet the image clung to him, his daughter mapping heavens no tutor had ever shown her, for no one had taught her. And yet, when she stood outside beneath the cold blaze of night, she could lift her finger to the sky and name a place in a tongue older than the vineyard, older than the Cape, older perhaps than Europe itself. The words fell from her lips like prayers, syllables worn smooth by centuries. She spoke them without hesitation, without even knowing why they came. And once spoken, they hung in the air like sparks refusing to die. From that night onward, something shifted between the children. Uriel still Ambro to the world, but bearing now the name Zuriel had breathed into fire, began to fill his notebooks with drawings. They were not mere doodles, they were labyrinths of meaning. The old Smit crest, but bent and reshaped, shields, and animals and crowns interwoven with forgotten emblems, fragments of runes half buried in swirls of ink, and always, at the margins, navigational marks like those mariners once carved into driftwood before casting off into seas no map had charted. Liora, for her part, began to mirror him. Where her brother turned his notebooks into heraldic riddles, she traced those same symbols into her atlas, aligning them not with roads or rivers, but with the constellations she claimed as her own. Borders dissolved beneath her pen. Nations blurred. Instead, she drew star lines, weaving emblems into the sky as though mapping another kingdom entirely. One unseen, yet sovereign above all. Frederik watched them with unease that grew heavier each season. The tutors saw only brilliance. The vineyard workers spoke in whispers, calling them strange children, but with a kind of reverence, as though aware they carried more than the soil's blood. Miriam lit candles more often in the chapel, praying in silence while her children bent over their charts and notebooks. Uriel himself said little. He only continued his sketches, hand moving as if remembering something older than his body. And Liora, when asked why she marked her atlas with symbols no school would recognize, gave no argument. She only smiled faintly, with that quiet, knowing curve of the lips that seemed too old for her youth. She smiled the same way on that morning when Uri'el, spoon laid down, announced his true name. She did not startle, did not gasp as Frederik had. She simply looked at her brother as if to say, "At last you remember," as though she had known all along. The cavern